Yes, sure. Can you get a look, Kiran?
Yes.
Okay, cool. We'll just wait like a couple minutes, and I guess then we can start.
Yes. Yes. Uh, yeah, on browser, can you go to the browser where you are showing the demo? Yes. You can slightly increase the font maybe.
I'll
Zoom
just
a
do
little bit.
it.
Yeah.
Is that fine?
Yes.
Cool. We'll just wait for some more people to join then.
Kiran, can you paste the URL of the YouTube so that I
Yes.
can share it with some people?
Yes. Uh, I'm putting in the chat.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kiran, I'll just be back in 1 second. I need my mouse. One
Sure,
second.
sure, sure, sure.
Someone is asking for Zoom link on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah, I'll give that.
Mhm. Kiran, when I see someone asking to admit, so shall I admit all or is there any?
Uh,
I
yes.
see.
Yeah, yeah, you
Okay,
can.
okay, okay. I allowed three more folks to
Yeah.
join.
Yeah.
Kiran, should we start at 2 5?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Kiran, should we go ahead and start?
Yes, yes, we can get started.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So, hey, I'm Russell. I'm a front end engineer at Archimedes. And today I'm going to be talking about forms in React, right? And specifically using forms with Formic in React, right? Okay. So, let's just get started. So there's obviously a couple of issues you have with forms in React. Number one is if you check the documentation on the React website, it's a little hard to decipher how to use forms with certain things, etc. Right? So the documentation isn't as detailed, and if you're running through this the first time, at least for me, I found it a little confusing, right? And as you write forms, it kind of becomes a big issue if you have a large application because nowadays I mean, applications essentially what let's say like a large percent of it is definitely forms, and you dealing with forms in a clean and efficient way really helps the whole experience from a UI perspective, UX as well as a DX perspective, right? So it's a very important thing, right? And a couple of things are very apparent when you start writing forms. Number one, you want them to scale without like having an infinite number of lines of code in every component, etc., right? And validation, instead of figuring out your own regex, etc., right? So it's always good to have a standard library, etc., like can handle all of your stuff. And error handling is extremely important, right? Telling your user, hey, this is not an email, like the length of this password is too less, just saying this is a required field, etc. So error handling is an extremely important aspect of a form. And lastly, if your application is, let's say, mid to large scale, you definitely need to look at uh, make writing components that are extremely reusable, and it will be very efficient in order to scale it as fast as possible, and just like have cleaner code in general, right? So first, what we're going to do is let's dive into the code, and we're going to look at two examples, right? Number one, we look at a normal form, which is just written in plain React. And then the next thing, we'll go ahead and write the same thing in Formic, and we'll start implementing a few more interesting things in Formic, which will give us a wholesome app, let's say, right? So cool. So let me just first give you guys like what is explain to you what Formic is. So Formic is a super cool library built by Jared Palmer, and it helps streamline building forms, and it's super cool. It ties up with something called Yup. Yup is a schema validation library. So it Formic is built in a way that it ties up with Yup really well, right? So these two things they work hand in hand, and they just work flawlessly. So I'll paste these links in the chat so you guys can check this out. But let me just close them for right now. So let's just dive into the code. Right. So a few things to keep in mind. Number one, I'm using Ant Design for my UI library over here, as well as I've already created a couple of custom styles, etc. And I'm using this. So this is plain React. There's no other library being used for the form, etc. Right. So let's just jump into how it looks here. Right. So this is a super simple form, as you can see, and I'm printing out a few things which are stuck in state. This is regarding email, this is your password, and this is just an is logged in boolean. So let's just jump into how this is written, and then we'll see how we can improve upon this, as well as how Formic and Yup is are just going to make our life way easier. Right, so cool. Firstly, we're looking at our state. So we have email, password, and is logged in. So let's not worry about is logged in right now. Let's focus on email. So the way this works is, um, the initial state of something, no one has touched any one of these fields. So when I'm referring to a field, I'm only referring to the email field right now, right? So we need to handle a few things, right? So when a user clicks on this itself, right, and they even like use it, for example, right? So we need to keep track of all these things, and we need to also keep track of the error, etc. Right? So this is when it gets a little cumbersome. So the way I did it here is I passed an object here. One of the keys is the value itself, and another one is error, and then we also know if it's touched or not, right? And the second thing we have is password. Passwords, like, let's not complicate this with this logic again. So it's just a simple string which holds your password, right? So let's just jump into the JSX. So the first three pre-tags are just rendering these out in this top section, so we can ignore this completely for right now. But let's just look into how this works, right? So I'm getting an input component from Ant. I'm passing it email dot value because email is an object that contains a key called value. I'm passing it an on change and placeholder, etc. Right. So let's just jump into the on change. So what's happening here is, I'm setting the state, with I'm spreading out email first and then changing the stuff that's required. So for my validation, I'm using a custom regex over here, right? So this is where it gets a little tough. You'll have to like find this or write this yourself, so it can get cumbersome, right? So I'm doing a validation which is custom every time, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, each on-chain itself will differ per input field, if you will, but then more or less they are the same, right? They handle a few things. They take the state, they take the value and then set it in the state, and then so that's a control component basically in React, right? And the second thing at the bottom you see here is I'm checking, there's a condition here, and then I'm saying, hey, this is not a valid email, and we show that. And let's jump to the password section, right? So I'm getting this password component from input, which is coming from Ant Design, and the same thing's happening there as well. I'm passing in the value, and there is a handle change here, which is basically set password, and that's setting it to state. So then finally the button is going to submit it, and let's just see what happens on submit, which is on the form. So we're going to prevent default, we're going to set is logged in to true. Over here basically you will add your own custom logic to like an async call, obviously, that's going to verify the user, etc. But since we're not doing that here, let's just assume this is it, and we're going to set the emails to we're going to reset these fields. So basically that's what's happening. So let me just show you this, for example. So let me just type in this, and you see this is all true, so there's no issues. And let me go ahead and type in some password, and you see the passwords here, and then I can hit login, and there we go. So we're logged in, and now we can just hit logout, and that should be fine, right? So this field didn't reset, I didn't have that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just check if what happens if we type a wrong email, right? So let's just say test, and we click out. Oh man, I didn't tag that in. But anyways, so you see these fields are basically checking for all of, one sec, someone's joining. Okay. So these fields are basically checking for all of these errors, etc. And we have to manually go ahead and add all these things, and it just becomes a little cumbersome for someone to keep track of and like manage all these things. So what another thing I've done, for example, is I've disabled it based on what these things are, like if these fields are filled, etc. Right. So it's a little cumbersome, as you can see. We have different states for each and every uh, field, if you will, right? Or it can also be a select, a checkbox, etc. And then we have to have like one, obviously handle submit. That's completely fine. But we might have multiple on change for each of these individual fields, which can become a little bit tough to keep track of. And obviously, validation is going to be a big pain for all of them, right? And that's something we definitely do not want. So this is how forms are more or less written in React. So let's just jump into how formic works, and let's go ahead and make this process a little easier, right? So let me firstly jump into the index and uncomment this. Right, so let's just go to this component. Let's close the rest of them. So what's happening now is you'll see all we're rendering out is basically just a simple card that just returns formic, right? So that's over here. So formic itself requires a few things. You can use the hooks, but I'm just going to use a plain React component. So let's go ahead and start importing stuff first, and then I'll explain how we're going to use it, right? So let's go to formic and let's pull out a few things. So first thing we're going to need is the form itself. Let me get to the form. I'll explain what these do in some time. Let me just hide this. Yeah, Zoom stuff. Okay, cool. So we're also going to pull in something called formic. Remember, these are React components. Then we are going to pull in something called error message, which we'll use in some time. And then finally, we're going to take something called formic helper. So since I'm using TypeScript, I'm going to need this. I'll show you where, right? So let me also import yup for my validation. Oh God, what the hell just happened? I just missed an answer. Okay, cool. So we imported our stuff, and now let's just go ahead and start writing this. So formic requires three main props, if you will. So the first thing is initial values. The second thing would definitely be, let's just say on submit for right now, right? And finally, we are going to be passing it validation schema, right? So let's just keep it there for right now. So let's go ahead and start implementing formic. So let's type formic. Let's ignore these for right now, and let's close this out. And okay, so let's go ahead and start creating all these things. So remember, it was a login component. So let's just assume we have two right now. So let's go create an object called values. Is an object that has email, which is an empty string. The initial state of this is an empty string, and then we have password that is also an empty string. Right. So now we can feed this into a prop called initial values, which formic is going to consume. And now let's go ahead and write the on submit, right? So let's say const on submit. This can be an async function, but since this is not an async function where there's no call happening, I'm just going to write like a plain function, right? Okay, so we can pass this into on submit. So on submit is going to pass a few things as arguments into this function over here. So namely, there are two things here. So this you get the values, and you will get something, a huge object called actions. Right. So let's go ahead and see what that is. But since we're using TypeScript, let's go ahead and create a few types first. Right. So let's just say type formic um, values is an object that has email, which is obviously a string, and it has password, which is a string. So You see, initial values is this, right? So we know that the values are not going to be anything else except this, unless we add another field here, but that's not going to happen right now, right? So let's assume it's only these two. So let's go ahead and set this to formic values, so we know exactly what this is. So now we have autocorrect. Like if we log this, we'll have values dot etc. So now actions is something we receive from formic. These are more utility based functions, which we'll get to in this, but let's just set types for them right now. So we'll have to use the formic helpers type I've received here, and it receives a generic. We can pass this exact same generic, so it knows which types exist on the initial values, right? So let me quickly show you what actions contains now. So you'll see it has a reset form, just like these a ton of these uh, utility functions, but we're not going to be using them right now. So let's just leave that as is, right? Okay, cool. So now that we passed that in, now let's go ahead and write our form, right? So we finish initial values and on submit, we'll get to the validation schema in a little bit, right? So let's go ahead, and so we need to pass a form, but since we are using formic, we might as well pick up the form they are giving us from their library itself. So this will inject any other props you need or whatever, right? So you don't need to manually do that. So let's just quickly pick up um, 1 second. Yep, someone's joined. Okay, so let's just quickly pick up form, and now let's go ahead and start typing out the inputs itself. So let's remember we're using input from here, which that's and. So let's just say input, right? Actually, we'll have to remove this, my bad. So first thing is we'll have to we'll receive a few things through render prop here. So I'm going to use it like this, right? So let's go ahead and pass a function here, and over here is where you can render out your stuff, right? So my bad. So let's go ahead and make this a control component, right? So let's pass the value. Let's assume we're going to pass it. Just let's leave it for right now. We'll pass a name. As of right now, let's leave it blank. We need to pass it an on change, and we also needed to pass an on blur, right? Let's also pass a placeholder. Let's actually say please enter email, right? Cool. So where are we going to be receiving these values? So we already know the value is an initial value, so we are not going to be doing like a initial value dot email. No, that would be the wrong approach here. We are going to be picking this directly from formic, because formic is going to do some things with it and pass it to us, right? So where do we receive values from? So if you destructure out the arguments here, you can get values. So since we already the formic's written in TypeScript, so it knows the type. So if we say values dot, we get the two um, keys over here that are basically corresponding to these. So let's just say email for right now. And the name property is something really important in formic. It always has to match the exact key name which is in your initial values. Right? That's how formic ties everything together behind the scenes. Cool. So let's go ahead and pass on change and on blur. So we can go ahead and destructure out a few more things from here. So let's just say handle change, and let's say handle blur. So we can pass them through handle change and handle blur, right? So there we go. We have this really simple thing hooked up. So let's just go ahead and print it out. Let's just print values. So we'll see what's being saved, right? So let's jump here. So we see the initial values, like we said, are empty strings. So if we start typing something, it starts getting saved. So it's already hooked up, right? That's great. So now let's just go ahead and copy the same thing and make the email part of it. I mean, the password part of it. So we'll be using password from input, which is coming from formic. So we'll just replace the name, and we'll have to say dot password. Let's call this password. Remember, this has to match the exact key name and initial values and password. So now if we jump back here, we'll see these fields. So let's quickly add just a bit of styling to them, right? So let's go say size is large, and we have last name, I think styles dot margin. So it's just basically like a margin bottom. That's going to show here. Yes. Right, so these two things already there, and if you see, if I start typing my password, is hooked up and this is hooked up. Great. So we have these two things. Now let's add some validation to this, right? So we're going to be using yup for the validation. So let's go ahead and create the validation schema. Okay, so since we're going to be using yup, let's go ahead and say yup dot object, since this is going to be an object, and let's pass in the object over here. So again, these have to be the exact same key names. So let's say email first. So now we're going to tell yup that this is a string, right? And this is an email, and this is also required, right? So let's go ahead and do the same for password. So let's say yup dot string, and this is required since we don't need to pass anything else. Now, in each of these arguments, you can pass a string, and this string will be displayed when an error happens, right? So if it is not an email, let's just say, please enter a valid email, right? And for required, let's go ahead and just say required, right? So it doesn't show anything else. Otherwise, Formic can show default text, but if you want to override the error messages, you can just pass it in here, right? So we can also say we want a minimum character length, but I'm not going to add that right now because it's just like a quick demo. So we need to pass the validation schema itself over here to a prop call validation schema, and we just need to pass this through, and that should hook it up automatically, right? But now how do we get access to this, right? You can obviously go ahead and destructure a few more things out of this, like errors, etc. But let's not like worry about that. We'll use something called error message, which is a React component that Formic provides, and we'll try to render out the whole error itself, right? So firstly, let's jump back here, and there's nothing that's going to render, right? But there's actually errors happening in the background because we haven't really shown those errors. So let's go ahead and do that. So firstly, let me wrap this in a div, and let me move this class name up here. Okay, so let's go ahead and say error message, and error message will receive a name. Again, this name is very important because it's tied to the initial values, and Formic knows what to pick where, right? So this also receives a render prop, but you can pass it this way. You will receive error message, which is obviously going to be a string, and then you can just return a p tag and just say error message. So remember, this error message is going to be the one that we passed over here, right? So let's just take a look at that. So by default, this is not going to show because there's no error, but you will see there you go. The moment we click in and click out, it knows it's a required field. So it's telling us this. So let's just go ahead and type in something wrong. Now it says, please enter a valid email. Now I can be like google.com. There you go. The error is gone completely. Right, so now let's just copy this component and add the same thing for password. So all we'll have to change here is password, right? So now we can check. Actually, no, yeah, there you go. That's much better. So let me just also wrap this in a div, so it'll be easier. Otherwise, the styles get off a little bit. Yeah, cool. So now you'll see the errors. If I type something, is completely fine, but then the moment I go back and I click out, it says required, right? So you can style this text as you prefer over here itself, and that should do it. So now let's go ahead and figure out the submission part of the whole thing. So let's start with adding a button. So your button obviously has to be within the form. Actually, let's just pick up the button from, let me just close this Zoom thing. Yes, so let's just pick up the button logic from the previous screen. Okay, so let's close this out. Okay, so let's just remove disable because we don't need that right now. And we have login, etc. Everything works. So the most important thing to pass here is obviously HTML type. You have to tell it that this is a submit button within the form. So the moment you pass it that, you will Formic knows what to do, right? So now on submits being called, and on submits obviously being passed at a Formic level, not a form level. And all on submit does right now is just log the values, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's just clear this. Let's just say test whatever, and then hit login, and there you go. So you're receiving the values that are being passed here, right? So, and now you can do anything you want with these values, for example, make a call, etc. Right? So now Formic definitely provides a few more interesting utilities rather. So let's just go ahead and start using them, right? So Let me jump to where I've destructured values from, and I'm going to pick two things from here. I'm going to pick something called is valid and dirty, right? So these will tell us the current state of our like errors, etc. These are just boolean values. So I know there's a prop called disabled on this button here, so let me just use it's valid and 30. So what's going to happen now is only, so the button's going to be disabled, and only if things are fine, like there's no errors, etc., will it be enabled. So you see this. So if even if I type, for example, a valid email, it's fine, right? But I need to also pass a valid password, at least a single character in our case, right? So if I just pass one character, now we're allowed to go ahead and say login, right? So that's great. That kind of helps make sure our user doesn't really send half the data across and have errors. So let's go ahead and also improve our UI and show them a loader, right? So we can use so Formic has something called submitting, a submitting state, which is a boolean, and you can initially it will be set to false, and you can trigger it in your on submit using the actions to either true or false based on what happens in your calls. So let's go ahead again and pick out set, I mean sorry, is submitting, which is going to be a boolean. And so antdesign provides a prop called loading, which just receives a boolean again, and based on that it'll either show you a loader or it won't show you a loader, right? So we just need to pass is submitting over here. So initially this is false, and if we set this to true, this will be enabled, right? So let's just go ahead and try to mimic that. So what we'll do is let's delete this, let's add a set timeout, since we are not going to be making an async call, right? So let's just say this takes about 500 milliseconds. And what we're going to do now is the first thing is actions dot set submitting. So we're going to tell Formic that yes, this is true. So I am setting submission to true. And actually, no, we need to do it outside my bad. And then 5 seconds later, I mean 500 milliseconds later, we're going to set this to false. So this makes sure we will see a loader. Right? So let's just see how that looks. So let me just drop this down a bit. Yeah. So I'm going to add an email, and I'm going to add a password, and I'm going to hit that. There you go. You just see for 500. Actually, let me increase that to maybe a second long, so you'll be able to see it properly. And there you go, right? So you're able to see what happens when we have an async call, for example, right? So these things, Formic helps us set the submitting states, etc., through on submit itself. So now let's just go ahead and hook up the is logged in function over here, right? So what we'll do is we'll assume this call always happens since this is not async, and we will go ahead and set this state, set this to true. And another thing we need to do is we don't really, once we submit this, we need to reset this, right? So we don't want these fields to be populated anymore, right? So let's use another utility function called reset form, and we will go ahead, actually let's pass that, yeah, let's just keep it here, right? So we'll use it over here. So what's going to happen is after it sets submitting to false, then it's going to reset the form, and then it's going to set the state of is logged in to true. So let's just handle what happens over here, right? So let me actually cut out this whole section. We'll say not is logged in. Let's add a quick, no, let's, we need to add a fragment here, and then we will, again, we'll just jump back to the old code, and we'll just pick up the logout button logic that is here. All this is going to do is on click is going to set the is logged in state to false. So let's just see how that works over here. So let's type something, hit login, and bam, we've logged in now. And the moment I hit logout, you see the states also reset. The moment I hit logout, I come back to the screen, right? So this is basically how Formic works, but let's just take it a little bit further and make sure we do not sacrifice on like reusability, because you see this function, this logic itself is very similar, right? So, and we definitely can reuse this a little bit. We don't need to constantly be passing a error message everywhere. So I've created uh, a component called input label Formic, let me just explain what this does and then we'll hook it up, right? So it accepts a few props. Number one, it accepts handle blur, handle change. Name formic is basically the name. I'm just calling it name formic, so it's a little bit more descriptive. Then we have the value. We also have a label now. We have placeholder, and we also have a is password boolean, which will render out the password input, right? So let's just see what's happening. There's a bunch of styles here. We have an error message, and you see it's taking the same name. And then if it's not password, then we have the input that's showing. We have like it's basically the same thing we had outside. And if it's a password, it will show this, right? So let's quickly add that in. So we'll save a lot of space here. So let's go ahead and let's call it input label formic, right? So let's close this. So we are going to pass the same things here, right? Handle blur, and we're going to pass it handle change. And remember, this is an email, so it has to tie up to the same value, the same key, values dot email, and we're going to be like email. So this is a required field. So let's add an asterisk. Let's go ahead and say enter. Actually, please enter email, and let's hit a save, right? So great. So now it's reduced to only one component. So we can do the same thing over here. So let's go ahead and delete that. Let's copy this down, and we'll have to change this to password. We'll have to change this to password, and this to password as well. And finally, we know this is a password field. So let's just say this password is true. So we're going to see a password input rather than its normal input. So now if we jump back and refresh, nothing should change. Obviously, this should all work out of the box. So let's just say admin, we type out some stuff, we hit login, this still works, and bam, you're done, right? So basically, this is how we in Archimedes at least use Formic. As much as possible, we make things as reusable as possible. Like for example, this function, and I mean this component itself, as well as using Formic itself abstracts a lot of these things, such as your validation, which is key, right? You're literally just passing a singular line over here, and you're not really writing any regex, so we don't really have that complexity anymore. And we also handle initial values and on submit, and all of this happens really clean, right? So this is a good design pattern that your team itself can implement at a maybe at a large scale, because in Archimedes we have a lot of places where forms are used heavily, and we built this whole system that we have that goes ahead and helps developers itself write good forms fast and clean, right? So they're very easy to debug. And for example, if you want to add another field here, right, let's quickly go ahead and add that. Let's just say full name, right? So it's as easy as adding a initial value. Then let's copy the same thing, because we do not have, let me just put this on top to follow that order, right? So this is also a string, and this is required. And then finally, we need to add it in the TypeScript types as well. So let's just say this is a string, so we don't have any errors from TypeScript. Then we can just copy this, paste this down, and we can say full name. I think that's the way. Yep, no, I have camel case this full name and full name, and let's just say full name, right? So then there you go. So it's as simple as adding just a few lines, literally copy pasting and just using the correct name, and we should have this. So you can see .com, and then password, and then we can hit submit, and there we go. Right, so everything resets. So now you can see like this is super easy to add new fields, etc. Like, let me just delete these things. So the fact that you have a really simple solution that cleans the way you write forms, and it doesn't really make it complex, it manages your validation, and it also helps with a lot of utility functions for your submission, your loading state, your errors, etc. So this is a really good approach to forms. At least that's what I feel. And yeah, so this is how we are implementing in Archimedes. as well as other projects, etc. So yeah, that's basically my talk so far. I hope that's been helpful. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and let me know.
Hi Russell. There are a couple of talks, couple of questions in the chat.
Yes.
The first one is, would this work within Nest.js?
Yes, definitely. So Formic works in any React app, right? Like for example, you can have it on Gatsby. We are using it on Gatsby in certain places, and I've used it on Next.js myself as well. Okay, the second question, in case of backend database, how does Formic go to work with the schema? So what you can do is, right, in your validation schema, you can add like a dot test over here. So you just need to check the documentation that will give you a little bit more details. Where over here you can, go ahead and pass your, I think this is a function over here. And what is going to do is going to check in the backend and verify those things. So you'll have to add that logic in a dot test method, and it should handle that for you. Okay, when we use the Dux API process, how on so the catch is we can't really do that, but we have a bit of a workaround in we are writing it in Archimedes as well. So we'll have to pass these utility functions down and then call them through. But we usually abstract it, so it's a little easier for us. But again, it depends on how you've written your code itself. It heavily depends on that as well. The way we've written it is it doesn't really cause much of an issue, but it is a bit of an issue. But we're trying to move away from Redux as much as possible. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well.
So I think that's all the questions we have for now. Uh, yeah, feel free to reach out to Russell Dias and maybe at Twitter if you have more questions.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Very nice talk.
Yes. Thank you, Kiran.
Um, Tarun, or do you want to take over? Hello, Tarun.
Yeah, Kiran. Yes, I'm just starting.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah. Russell, maybe you can stop sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, guys, let me know when you can see the screen.
Yes, yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Tarun Nagpal. I'm working as a front-end developer. You can follow me on Twitter, Tarun_geek. I used to write blogs and share some new talks about React. So today, what I'm going to uh, today what I'm going to share is the a new state management technique, which is Mobex. It's an app and state manage. I'll first talk about what is app application state and what is state management, and then what is Mobex and Mobex state tree, and third is I'll compare Mobex with Redux and a small working example. So basically, my talk is about the way we manage the state into React. Right now, we heavily depend upon Redux, or if it's a small application, we do prop drilling to manage our app. So I'll share a different way which I recently used apart from Redux. I found a couple of disadvantages of using Redux, like unwanted boilerplate code, and the flow is too big for a one cycle. So To understand these problems and to overcome these challenges, so I worked on Mobex and Mobex State Tree. So I'll try to explain how I used it and how it can benefit you in your React project. Okay, I'm not sure why it's coming. Oh, yeah. So the very first question is, what is state? In a nutshell, or in a lawman's language, I would say it is an interface or a connection between your data and the various sources it change the data. For example, you have user data, and the way you manage that user data in the complete app is the place which you call state. And I would say is a single source of data that can be that multiple components can use. I mean, you have a single source where you can where this data can be used in multiple components. So I'll show an example. Like, and this is my let's say a Twitter, take an example of Twitter database. So in Twitter, my database could be stored in I'm taking any normal example, my user, which contain name, email, and my Twitter handle. So this is a user object. There can be thousands or hundreds of objects available, so all these place that Twitter use, they have to store in a centralized place, so that they can track like which was the old state and what is the new data, what was the old data, who changed, proper logging mechanism, debugging. And think of an application like a share market application where the current state of the share can be changed in every second, and you have to log everything and you have to manage things accordingly. So to manage all these kind of environment in React, so we have this state. So next is, what is state management? I mean, I would say it's a process in which you effectively handle your application state. I mean, it is a process, or it's a technique in which you smartly handle your application state, so that if it's changed from multiple sources or multiple times, or I mean multiple components, you find it very good to manage. I mean, you don't mess your React application because you're unsure who changed the last state and what is changing it. The data was showing right, but suddenly after 1 second you show a different state. You are totally unsure who's doing that. So to, in order to manage these this state, so we need state management technique. We have various state management techniques in React right now. One is Redux, another is Mobex, and the and Facebook is also coming with its own API on library. I'm not remember the name. I think Reconcile or something like that. They also provide the context API in React, which it's also an internal way to handle the state. So, so these are all the process by which you manage your application state, and the way you handle is the management. And we have a lot of benefits if we manage our state in the React application effectively. Benefits like, we have a proper structure of an app. Like if you're working for application 1 year down the line, you left and you start the application 1 year back, I mean later, you if you follow the proper structuring, you know where you put all the files. So Redux and other libraries provide these benefits. I mean, you can debug your application like a pro. I mean, you have a lot of logging library available that can help you track even a single dot of your application. With the help of debugging tools and loggings, you can manage your state. Third is the restrict, or I would say security, that unwanted source. Like if you put data in a centralized place and you know from which source it's coming, and if you detect something, it's the data is changing from a different source. I mean, so that you can prevent that. So okay, now comes to Mobex. Mobex, I would say it's a simple and scalable state management solution. Why it's simple, why it's scalable, I'll explain next. But I would say Mobex is it's a standalone library. There is no direct connection between Mobex and React, but most people are using it with React because they found it very useful these days. It basically synchronize your application state with your React component. I mean, it acts as a glue by which your application state and your React application can be binded in a very good and efficient manner. So basically, what it does, Mobex basically create a dependency state graph. I mean, it's a kind of a proper structure it creates of dependencies, and it makes sure your application only updated when it's actually needed, so that you save unwanted re-rendering on your application. So you can check out the I'll share the link at the end, so you can check out the theory behind Mobex. What I would say, it works on a pattern observer observable, which is very easy to learn, and you can utilize their own features that we are using uh, in other libraries, like in Angular we use RxJS. So similar kind of functionality you can use it, and you basically save a lot of extra unwanted code. Okay, so like I already said, Mobex has advantages over Redux. The very first and the biggest advantage, which I personally like, is the minimal boilerplate. Like if you talk about Redux, or if you have worked on Redux, you have to write code in 3 4 lines just for a single API call. You write an action in component, then you write, then you dispatch it, then in reducer you write, and then you write Redux Saga or Thunk, and then you get back into the component. So the kind of cycle takes a lot of boilerplate code, which Mobex avoided. In Redux, you need, you need a dispatcher, or I would say reducer, to basically bind your state. Wherein in Mobex, if you created your store and you have attached that store to every components, your internal components don't need to be notified. Okay, boss, so this state has changed. So it derives your application state automatically into your component. For example, you have weather API and you have weather application, where after every 30 minutes or 40 minutes, it will randomly show you a weather of a random city. Let's take an example. So all your components who are sharing the weather, they don't need to be notified via dispatcher or a reducer. It derives your state automatically. Whenever the API change at the background, your application will show the updated weather. And in terms of learning curve, I would say Mobex has less learning curve. You only need to understand one pattern and you are good to go. Okay. So this is the data flow of Mobex. What we do, we have all the actions. Action can be anything, like from your HTML, you click a button like submit form, or you hit a API like show me my data. Anything. The action could be anything. From the HTML or your React component, you trigger a action, and this action modifies your application state. This may be getting value from third party APIs, or this could be internal calculation, or this could be your manipulation of data, something like that. All the third party things can be modified here. So whenever you have your updated value, whenever you change your state, the updates with the help of compute values. This is a portion where you store your basically where you get your updated data. And when you get your updated data from state, you trigger that data to HTML or your React component. So this cycle repeats on. You have your HTML, basically a button like what is the weather today. Click on the bottom, it will show you weather. Or like give me a thought of the day. You click a button, thought will be displayed. So this cycle, whenever you hit any action in your application, so this cycle flows. I mean, this is the basically flow by which Mobex manage your application. So this is a tried and tested mechanism by which you can, like I created application which is an admin dashboard, and it was a huge functionality like multiple roles and multiple sources and multiple imports, uploads, S3 uploads. I mean, I have handled huge application with the help of same Mobex data flow. Okay. Now let's talk about the code structure, how we write. I mean, I like it the way Mobex manage the store is very familiar. If you're coming from backgrounds like object-oriented languages, or if you have worked on any kind of getter-setter pattern, or like common classes pattern, if you have used, you will be very feel familiar with that. So how does Mobex structure its code? See, this is a file which we call it store. I mean, this is the complete application state that is stored in a store. What it does it, I mean, we have on every store we have this model where the whole data reside. So this is the view part. View part means if you want to see the list of users, you write a function in view. And if you want to see the to-do list, you call a function action. So action is a place which actually changes your model. I mean, you can I would say compare it with the MVC or like any other common pattern. It's not a pure MVC pattern, but it's a kind of same thing that we are doing. So you can sorry, this spelling is wrong. So you can create as much as store you can. I mean, user, to do, these are all different altogether modules. You create a different modules and import that module in this file. If you want to change anything uh, globally, you can put here, and if you have to change anything internal store, you can write the same pattern inside this store. And this is the place which actually create a variable, or I would say value, that will act as a store. I mean, root store is the I would say a type by which we created all the stores and combine it into one. And with the help of this store, we stored all the values, and you can pass the default values to each store here. I mean, you are so here when you when you write dot create, you are basically like you are calling the constructor, and in the constructor you pass all the default values. I mean, if you observe this pattern and if you understand it clearly, you can create any React application, no matter how big the size is, no matter how much complexity it has. And you will find that this pattern will give you a way by which you can write less code and achieve more things in the particular code. Okay, now let me show you a coding example that will clarify more things. Mm, okay. First of all, I'll show you what I have built here, and I will share the GitHub link as well. If you want to play with the code or explore, or if you want to use it in your next project, you can use the same structure. So what I did is, uh, Kiran, can you confirm? Is the screen visible again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes, it's visible.
Okay. Is the font also okay?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay. Thanks. So what I did is, it's a small to-do app like This is basically any task I add, like buy me coffee, add task, add task. So what I'm doing is, like, I have created a small to-do app. I mean, with the help of this text box, you input the values, and with the help of add task, you have button. And when you click on this done, you can see the state changed with the help of Mobex. I'll show you the complete code. I mean, when you tick on it, all the components will get notified, and wherever you have used this variable, it will be shown. Likewise, it decrease. So how I build this small application which can be scaled up to a huge level with the help of Mobex, I'll show you. Uh, Let me share. Okay, now let me increase the font. Okay, now let me first guide you the folder structure which I use. What I did is, like, I didn't I created two store here. One is to do store, another is user model. Let me first guide you how you can integrate your Mobex in any React app. So what you need is, you basically need three packages. One is the Mobex, which is the raw package. I mean, uh, this is no relation with the React. Mobex React is the binding of Mobex and React, just like we have React Redux. So we have Mobex React. Mobex state tree. I mean, this is way which I prefer, because it gives somewhat structure similar like Redux, so that you have less learning curve if you're coming from Redux. Otherwise, it will give you a tree type shape. For this, you need Mobex state tree. That's it. These are the only three packages you need in order to set up your Mobex. So here, what I did is, here I created this store. Uh, Let me minimize all. Yeah. Okay. So I created this two child store, to do and user, and I have imported these two in the model here. And with the help of views, I am manipulating these, and with the help of views, I am getting this, and with the help of action, I am changing the values. And finally, this is the store which I'm calling with the default values. Like, if I specify anything here, I save it. Sorry, I'm not able to show the browser. There is a back and forth issue. Okay, so this is the default value which I'm passing, and this will be picked by this store. So now this is the main file where we have our store. So you can create your store like this, your MVC pattern, or what you call. And in this store, you import all this. You call this constructor root store dot create, in which you pass all the default values of your store, and your complete store can be in different modules. So this is the pattern which I follow. This is not, there is no hard and fast rule. You can use whatever pattern you need. So types is a way by which Mobex state tree gives you a power, like we created data types and like users to do, and you can manipulate with that. And values is a way by which you can return the values. and I created two child store. One is this to do name and done. And set name is a value like whenever you submit the what you called form, you set the name of the task. And toggle is a state by which you mark this task as done or not done, and it is returning set name and toggle two function. So this actions can be written here. So we don't need view here, so that's why I haven't used it. So I use two properties in the model, and I have used actions. So this comprises of my to do model. So this user model, although I'm not using anything, just for the sake of demonstration I have shown it. So by the way, if you are familiar with TypeScript or new syntax of ES6, so this types is kind of same thing by which you can create any data type you want. I mean, it will extend JavaScript's existing capability of data types, and will give you another data type that you can use. Same functionality that TypeScript gives. Like you can create your own data types. So it have a huge list of data types that you can use internally and manipulate with it. So this is a to do, this is user, and with the help of store I created it. Now I'll show you how I binded this store to the complete application and how it is different from Redux. Like you don't so whenever the value is changed in this store, if you have already subscribed to the store, you don't need to notify the components. It will automatically derive this store values. First I'll show you how I binded this store. You go to index.js. See here, with the help of app, I what I did is I simply pass a store like this, and the props that are given here, this props dot store, this is globally available in every component of your React app. You can directly hit to dos, or you can directly hit any other store value. See, I have this to do store, which I called here uh, yeah, this to do's. You can directly use this to do's or any store you want. You don't need to import your I mean you don't need to import your store here, child store here. Once you pass the store as a in the application props, so this will be available to your complete app. And whenever something in change in when there is any change in the global store, the components can be automatically notified about it. So these are all the helper functions I write. So how I created this application, like this is a small app. This is a button I have, add task. Whenever I do on click, I'm just adding a value in the store. Add to do the function which I created. You cannot go directly. Okay, I'll show you this function, and when you click on add task button, it will add this value. So this is the view by which we are showing the values, and this is the counter view on which we are displaying how much tasks are left and how much things are left. So you can see in this component, I am using the global store of Mobex, and there is no direct dependency of the store. Only one change that you need to do is you need to make your component observer. That's it. Once you make it observer, like this in app also I make it observer, it will automatically I would say it will follow the observer observable pattern by which it will automatically get these values available into your store. Yeah, so few advantages which I already said. So you can see the packages that you require is you don't need any kind of Thunk or Redux Saga or any other values. You can manipulate these Ajax calls according to your store. You can create your own. place where you put all these values. You don't need generator functions like we need in Redux, like where you pause your execution, and there is no what you call dispatchers available. You can directly uh, call your application state component directly from your components like this. And whenever you want to get the updated value, you don't need to check the previous next values or something. You can simply show your values like this. Yeah, now coming back to the slides. Yeah, I'll share all my slides and other on my Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter where I will share all these materials and GitHub links. Yeah, now it's your turn. I'm available for any questions or any kind of doubts if anyone have.
Thanks, Tarun. If you have any questions, you can ask now.
Mm, I think Kiran, we are. If there is no more questions, I think we are good for now.
Yes, yes, yes.
But still, if anyone have question, you can contact me or directly. I'll happy to help.
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Tarun. Nice talk. Uh, we'll take a short break now. We'll take a 10-minute break and maybe start the third talk at 3:20. Uh, so meanwhile, you can grab some water or take a short break and come back by 3:20. Ashwin, do you want to share your screen and make sure everything is working?
Yeah, just a minute. Huh?
So if you want to have some general discussions also, you can do that right now until we start the third talk. Nice. Ashwin will start in at 3:20.
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm getting an echo. Do you have YouTube on somewhere?
I don't think so. Let me check.
So I felt like I got an echo. I think it's okay now.
Okay. Is it still echoing?
No, no, no.
Okay,
I
cool.
think it's good now.
Okay.
Hello, Ashwin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your voice was slightly low, I guess.
Is it good now?
Uh,
I'll talk louder then.
okay, okay. Yeah, I think you can get started now.
Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Ashwin Khode. So, my topic is Flux, the architecture of React. Maybe some of you have heard about it, some of you maybe don't. So, what is Flux? So, Flux is an architecture for React, right? It's not a framework, it's not a library. It's just an idea to build your application. Okay. So, the idea of Flux is it's unidirectional data flow. So, Facebook came up with Flux to uh, to solve the problem that MVC used to give during their chat. So basically, Facebook encountered an error in their chat system. So they come up with the Flux system. It is a unidirectional data flow. So what? What is this Flux architecture? So Flux consists of four main parts: action, dispatcher, stores, control view. Okay. So let me give you an overview first. So it complements React composable view components by utilizing unidirectional data flow. As I said, it's more of a pattern. Okay, it's not a framework, it's not a library. You don't in this topic we are not going to code anything. We are just looking at how React works and how it's built, the idea behind the architecture of React. Okay, so Flux application has three major parts. Like the dispatcher is the central part of the Flux. It's the central unit which holds all these components together. So action is which triggers the helps method that facilitates passing data to the dispatcher. Okay. So whenever you do an action on your application, it sends the data to the dispatcher. Now, what is dispatcher? Dispatcher receives the action and broadcast payload to register callback. So basically, dispatcher uh, it's a nerve system of the Flux. Okay, whenever it receives an action, it decides what the data should be passed on and what callback function should get registered in the store, so that the next data, what data should be passed to the store. Okay, so and then the store, what is store? Store is a container for application state and logic that have callback register to the dispatcher. So when dispatcher uh, dispatches the action, it broadcasts the payloads, it sends the data to the store, then store contains that data and store it in itself. Okay. Now controller view. Controller view is a React component. It's basically it's a pure React component, user interface component that grabs the state from the store and pass it down the child component via props. It basically render the data, takes the data and render your model. So let's get in detail what is dispatcher. So it is a central hub for your application. As I said, it receives action and dispatches the you have probably seen this code if you have dealt with Redux. So let me show you a diagram. Yeah. So the problem people used to face with MVC is the structure of the model used to get so big, so giant, that multiple model used to do multiple uh, views, used to render multiple views by triggering multiple actions. So it used to get hard for keep track of what action will trigger what change in your model view. Okay, so that's why Facebook came with this idea of unidirectional data flow. So once your action is triggered and once your action is has got into dispatcher, the dispatcher will not take any action unless and until it finishes its current action. Okay, so there is by doing this there is no side effect in your application. So the dispatch whenever an action is triggered, the what does the dispatcher do is it takes the action, it detects the action, its source, and according to that it dispatches the data to the store. And store contains the application state and logic. So whenever a change in store is occurred, the controller view change re-renders the whole model. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. View controller. It is purely a React component. It is like a triggering render method. Whenever a change in store is happened due to dispatcher, the view component re-render itself. So this is what it looks like. So how Flux solved the problem of MVC? So as you can see, it is a unidirectional data flow. That you cannot disrupt the process once the action is got triggered the dispatcher. Okay, once the action is triggered, dispatcher does its work. Then and once the view is changed, then only another action uh, can cause the change to the view. So action creators are helper methods collected into a library that create an action from method parameter, assign it a type and provide it to the dispatcher. Then every action triggers a callback function that payload that gives back data to the store and view render that data. So what this did is it prevented your application of any side effect. Once once you have once you trigger any action, the change is you are going to see the change in your view. Okay, so where is this Flux is used? So Flux is the backbone of React. This is how React works behind the scene. And most of you have used Redux. It's a state management library. Redux also used this idea, this architecture of unidirectional data flow and implemented it in its own way. And that's why Redux is also pretty popular because it's much that makes your code base much more uh, predictable. It prevents sidebacks so that you don't encounter any error in your application. So yeah, you can read more about Flux on facebook.github.io/flux and GitHub, yeah, their repo. So I'll just talk about to give you a brief overview of what Flux is. So Flux is the application architecture that Facebook uses for building client-side web application. It basically complements React's composable view component by utilizing a unidirectional data flow. This is like this was like a huge counter to MVC. Uh, it solved many bugs on in Facebook website. It's like more of a pattern. It's not a library, as I told you. It's more of an architecture that makes your application much more predictable, much more secure, and reliable. There's no side effect. There's not any error that causes regardless of your action. Mm, yeah, Flux eschews MVC in favor of a unidirectional data flow. Whenever a user interacts with a React view, the view propagates an action through a central dispatcher to the various store that hold the application data and business logic, that which eventually updates all of the view that are affected. It renders all the changes of change of data that store has made. So this works especially well with React declarative programming style, which allows the store to send updates without specifying how to transition views between states. Mm, yeah, yeah. So I don't know what to talk about what to tell you more. This is basically what Flux is. It take this is all of Flux. This is the Flux, basically this unidirectional data flow which solve all the problems that MVC used to cause, and this is what React made of. Why Flux? Why you should know about Flux is so you could build better application, as you can avoid many side effects. You can make your code uh, much more readable, much more predictable, so that you can know where, if you encounter any error, you would immediately know what action is causing that error. That is why flux is uh, Flux and React are so popular. Everyone knows about React, and Flux what made React so popular. So yeah, that's all for my talk. Thank you. If anyone has any question, please ask.
So thanks, Ashwin.
Yeah. Is there okay? Is there any question? Okay, if Flux is just an idea, then how are you going to demo it? Actually, Facebook provided a dispatcher library just for its sake. Okay, if you want to test the idea of Flux, what Flux is, Facebook provided the library. You can find it on GitHub. You can use it with Node on your backend. You can test how action triggers the yeah, there is Flux utils also. Basically there is a whole like there are tools. Flux is an architecture, is an architecture. Okay, so there's not you can do much with Flux. You can just test it around. You can have a little fun with it. You can test it on your application. But yeah, the better version of the if you want to know Flux, you can see Redux. Redux is a better version of Flux. It 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 revolves around the idea of Flux only: unidirectional data flow, the action dispatcher, the store, and the controller view. Yeah, thank you, that's all.
Yeah, thanks, Ashwin. Manuraj, do you want to take over?
Yes, let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. Uh, I'm Manuraj. I'm a front-end engineer at Atlassian, primarily working on the Jira Cloud. So the talk right now is about the simplifying dependency injection in React. Uh, yeah, let's get started. So this is the agenda for my talk. We are briefly discuss about the problem, so what actually we are trying to solve, um, what is the dependency injection pattern, and I mean I have come across
few dependency injection pattern. We will go through a couple of them. One is via default props, one is with HOC, and how we solve all the problems we have with the previous approaches using React Magnetic TI. Yeah, so let's jump into the problem. What is the problem actually? Yeah, so when it comes to the React, where everything is a component, right? So you take a presentation component, you take a controller, you take a service. Everything in React is a component, and easily your simple component will turn into a complex, very hierarchical component. So the efficiency or the effectiveness of the test cases or the stories you provide hugely relies on how you mock those components, mock the dependencies of that component. Yeah. So the problem or the entire talk is will be focusing on how we effectively mock the dependencies of a component using multiple patterns we have, and finally we'll talk about the React Magnetic TI, which simplifies the problems we face in the current world. Yeah, just give attention here. This is the example I'm going to refer throughout my talk. This is just a comments component. It has comments query component. It's a service component where it fetches where it makes a request and gives back the data. If it is loading, yeah, it is loading. And we have this comment state controller. It's a UI state controller where stores the UI state, something like expanded, collapsed, yeah, all the stuff related to UI. We have the controller for it, and we have a comments list, and then we have comment. Yeah, this is the component I'm going to refer throughout my talk. Let me know. I mean, pause me if you're not clear on something. I will hold on there, and then I will start from then. Yep. So consider this component. I'm going to talk about two things here. So one is the test, and another is the stories. If for the test, I mean, how do you test effectively? One way is to mock the comments query and the comment state controller. These two components are the dependencies here, right? So how you test your component is depends on how you mock this. One way is to use the just mock, right? Just mock the imports of comments query and comments state controller. The problem with that is you have to mock for every test you have to cover. So for example, you have to test for the expanded state of the comments list. You have to mock it, and also you have to mock for the collapse state also. This is for comment state controller. What about the comments query controller? Comments query component. You have to mock for every state of the data, like the loading false, if there is an error, if there is no data, right? So you have to mock the imports of the component, and you will end up having huge logic just to mock the components, right? So this is one part of it, which is a test. And what about the stories, right? So where we give the live examples if the component is a public. So in the stories, unfortunately, we don't have a mocking technique like the just mock. What you can do is you have to mock the if you consider this comments comment, what you can mock is the request you are making in the comment square, right? And again, you have to mock uh, the multiple requests, right? You have to for the comments query itself, to fetch the comments, you have to consider multiple requests. Like you have to mark for the 200, you have to mark for the 400, you have to mark for different states you want to test. Now, this is also a problem because the API is actually is a concern of the comments query. It's not the concern of the component you are testing. You are actually uh, not differentiate the concerns. It is bringing the problem by having you need to basically understand the internals of how the comments query work, and you have to bring and you have to mock those in the stories. That is one problem. So if you see the test and stories individually have their problems, and to put together, we are mocking these things in a different way, using just mocks for the story, the test, and we are mocking the request in the stories. So this is what the problem I'm gonna talk about, right? So Yeah, so I mean, the problem, to summarize, we are using the just mock, which is not reliable anymore. I mean, it is reliable, but it is bringing a lot of overhead to the developers who wants to write effective tests. And also, you have to mock in different ways in the test stories. This is the problem, right? So this is where the dependency injection pattern comes into the picture. So dependency injection pattern is very simple, where instead of using the dependencies from the direct imports, you pass those dependencies as a props. I will there are, I mean, I have used couple of patterns before. I'm going to show those patterns now. I'm sure there will be other patterns where you can inject the dependencies. I'm going to cover two things. As I mentioned, one is using the uh, I mean, DI via default props. So from now on, if I say DI, so it's basically a dependency injection. Yeah. The idea here is, as I mentioned, all the dependencies you have to use in the component, you pass it as a props instead of consuming directly from the imports. Now give a closer look. We are having the imports, comment square import and the comment state control import. We are providing the RSS using the DI, and we are using, we are actually destructuring, we are using the JavaScript destructuring and the default value technique here. We are assigning those dependencies as the default values to comments query and comment state controller, and then we use that inside the component, right? So this is how no, this is how this patterns is all about. We are actually not using the component directly through the imports. Instead, we pass it to the props via props. So yeah, now if you want to write tests, or if you want to write stories for this, all you have to do is you write a mock component for it, and you just pass it as a props instead of just mocking the entire request. um, let's say if you want to write a test for the expanded comments, you can write a component, mocked component with expanded state, and then pass it that component as a comment state controller. And similarly for the collapsed, yes, you can again mock the component with the collapsed state, and you can pass it as a component as a prop, which will be injected in the component. This is one of the pattern, and slightly improved pattern. This is a test, right? I forgot about the stories. Now the stories, it's the same, right? You are actually mocking the components the same way as how you are mocking in the test. Whereas in the previous way, we use just mock in the test, but there is no just mock in the stories. So this pattern is better in solving that problem, right? So you basically are mocking no, the dependencies in the same way in both tests and as well as stories. And the next pattern, which I'm going to talk, is about is using the HOC error component. It is a bit similar but slightly improved. Let's take a code, and I hope you'll understand. So here we are not using default values. Instead of passing as a default values, we use a higher order component which takes the actual components, and we assign the direct imports as a prop values. See, if you see here, the thing has changed. Comments, instead of, we are not providing the default values to comments query or comment state controller. Instead of we are using with di HOC, and we are passing comments, and we are passing comments query components direct import to comments query, and comment state controller component di to the comment state controller. That's all. I mean, it's just that different variable to the pattern we used before. Instead of passing the default value, now use the HOC. If you want to understand how, I mean, just how, if you want to see how what will be the implementation of with the di HOC, here it is. It takes a component and injected props. Okay, so it returns a wrapped component with injected props, and also the props used in the actual if let's say if you want to use this component in any of the other component, you use the default instead of the comments. Whereas in test, you have to use the comments instead of the default import. Okay, so that's where, I mean, if you use the export default, it is wired up with the, the imports we are doing in here. Whereas if you want to test it, it will be difficult. That's why we have to import the comments, not the default import. We'll look at it, take a look at it now. So here, so the major, I mean, with respect to testing or writing the stories, nothing has changed between this and this, except we have consumed comments, not the default export, but the actual comments component. Nothing has changed. We still pass the components as a props. Okay, yeah, everything is the same. What about the stories? And again, the same. Nothing has changed between the previous two examples. It's just that we are, in terms of writing tests or stories, nothing has changed. Just that in the how we write, how we inject the dependencies, we use the HOs instead of the default values and destructuring. Yeah, I know. I mean, most of you guys may not be happy on how we are dealing with this, mainly because of these three reasons, right? So we are polluting the API by introducing unnecessary props, right? You don't know what is the real props and what are the DI props. These are the problems, and also you have to provide aliases for all the importers like the DI here. Right, so these are the problems, right, with the current approaches and current pattern. I'm sure there will be other patterns as well, which I may not aware of, but I mean, these are the patterns which I know, which is working well in the industry right now. Now, is there a way, instead of passing the dependency as a prop, is there another way? Like, why can't we use the React context no, to drill or inject the dependency instead of passing as a props? First, say like this. Why don't we just say use this comments query default data and comment state with component expanded, and we use the dependency provider, which is a context provider, and pass it to comments, whereas comments use that and use whatever the mocked dependencies we provided, and comments use this. It's if you give a closer look, comments is not accepting the props which we want to inject. Those are for the previous patterns, but not anymore. Now it's pretty much clean, right? So that's what React Magnetic TI package solves for us. React Magnetic TI makes use of the React context and also a little bit of Babel magic to solve the problems which I explained so far. Hope I'm clear till now, right? Or do you have... Okay,
yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, so React Magnetic DI, it's pretty new in terms of relatively new. It made public 2 months ago. We in Atlassian, we started using the React Magnetic DI, but also the author is from the Atlassian. And if you in terms of the scale, the Atlassian has a big mono repo for the Jira frontend. It is working absolutely fine in terms of scale and in terms of performance, right? So what actually my React Magnetic DI is, how can we use it, right? Let me rewrite the component which I created before and see how React Magnetic DI simplifies it. Yeah, this one. So all you have to do is, this is actual comments component. All you have to do is include the DI statement, where you pass the comments query and comment state controller. Now, what we are saying to the React Magnetic DI is, hey, these are the components which needs to be injected, which needs to be mocked and injected. If you don't mock, that's fine. We will use the actual implementation. Otherwise, we will change the implementation of those components to the mocked components you provided. It's pretty cool, right? So you don't have to introduce unnecessary props. You just that you have to add a statement to the DI. Oops, if you see this is a functional no component. What about the stateful or the class component? You have to include the same DA statement inside the render as the first one, right? So nothing changes. You still you use the way. Let's say even if the component is already there, you just need to index no do the dependency injection. You don't have to no change the public API by introducing the props. Instead of that, you just add this statement. Nothing changes. No, there is no change in the public API, right? So that's what it's that cool. What happened? I mean, what happens internally in the backend internally is for the test and the dev environment. In the test and dev environment, the React Magnetic DI will change the implementation of the comments query and comment state controller to the mocked components we provided through the tests or stories. Now, what happened to the production? In production, that's where the Mavel magic comes into the picture, where it just strips off this statement. No effect. Nothing, no, I mean, literally 0% effect in the production, as if there is no changes in the component. That's how cool is. Now let's see how we can write tests or stories. Yeah, in terms of the exports, React Magnetic DI provides 3 exports. One is DI, which we are using in the component, and another 2 is DI provider, which is a context provider, and injectable. If you see here, the comments query DI equal to injectable of comments query and the comments query default data. Comments query default data is a mock component, and we are telling the React Magnetic DI is, hey, change the comments query implementation to comments query default data. And it is similar for the expanded and collapsed DI. What we are telling to the React Magnetic DI through injectable is, hey, change the implementation of comment state with comments expanded with the comment state controller. That's how that's what we had to do. That's what we had to tell to the React Magnetic DI, and use those the injected components as a use prop in the DI provider. If you see in with expanded comments test, we are using DI provider, we are using comments query DI and comment state controller expanded DI, and we just render the comments. That's all. We are not doing anything here. Cool. And with in terms of the stories, it's the same, right? So if you check here and this, it's just that you have to you have to use the same mocked components and use the same DI provider and use the injectable to the mock any component you want. To summarize, this is how it looks like. In the left side, the actual component, what you have to do is you just need to include a single statement, which is DI. In DI, you have to pass on all the dependencies which you have to mock. It's okay if you add the components which you don't want to mock. DI will take care of the not changing the implementation of that. And on the right side, this is how you actually inject the dependencies using the injectable and the DI provider. Using injectable, you provide the implementation you want to provide for the actual component, and the DI provider you pass those the injected components there, and that's it. One more thing, the React Magnetic DI also provides the higher order component, which is called with DI. If you see, the first 2 exports is actually similar to, actually same as the second 2 exports. It's just that with DI wraps your component inside the DI provider, and you use the second argument as the injectables. That's all. I told, right, we have to and in the production mode, the DI statement will just be stripped off, so that there will be no change in performance, or there won't be any effect at all. You just have to include this line in the bubble RC or bubble config.js of your project. It does provides a couple of options, as I mentioned, for the development and the test. Except for the production, it will be stripped off. I mean, if you want to change that, if you want to change that for custom environment, you can use this option. I mean, to enable that stripping off. I mean, when we are using DI, it is easier to misuse, and it for that we need some restrictions, right? So that's where this model also provide ES rules for us, like the order exists to inject, no duplicate of device, no extraneous components, and sort dependencies. You can enable this ES rules, and somehow you can restrict misusing of the DI. And one more thing which I want to tell about the React Magnet DI, which I liked, is even if you are using any of the patterns like this, any of the patterns right now in your project, and if you want to include the React Magnet DI, it perfectly gels well here. I mean, you don't have to change the public API, right? Whatever the component you have right now. Instead of, you can just, whatever the new components you want to include, you include inject those dependencies with DI. You don't have to change the comment query or comment state controller, which is already using the other pattern. It's fine. It's completely works well with other patterns. I mean, you can use two patterns with React Magnet TI. If migrating is a problem for you guys, you can slowly migrate one by one. Yep, instant rules. Yeah, so these are some cool things. I mean, these are the steps, I mean, the items which I copied from GitHub repo itself. Close to zero performance overhead on dev and testing. It's just we are wrapping the component inside with the React provider. Zero performance overhead on production. Absolutely zero performance, because code gets shipped unless told otherwise using the bubble config you are modifying, right? One more thing is, I mean, even the CI builds, right? As I mentioned, Atlassian has a huge monolith for Jira, Jira front end, and we have seen nothing or absolutely zero effect in terms of the CI builds, right? So there is a good in that terms as well. Works with any kind of functions or classes. You can dependency inject any functions or any classes. If other than functions or classes, if you want to inject any values, just use the setters and getters, and you can inject that as well. And replaces dependencies at any depth of the directory. One more thing which I forgot, my bad. Let's say consider this okay example, and let's say you have to use comments in some other, I mean, in the same component. You have to use the comment component in other in another place. Okay, you can use a DI while mocking it. You can provide the target, you can provide the parent where you have to mock this dependency. It's that cool. You can basically control the hierarchy, and you can control the dependency injection in the hierarchy. It's not like if you dependency inject at the top, it will change the dependency for in every occurrence. It's not like that. You can control that as well. Yeah, allow selective injection is what I talked about. Enforces separation of concerns. Yes, just uses context. So it doesn't matter which test or which stories you're using, as long as you're using React, you can use this library. A little bit of limitations here. So if you are using Engine, shallow, we don't have full support for shallow yet, because it's a problem with Engine right now, and you cannot use dynamic use and target props. It officially supports injecting only functions and classes, yes, and does not replace default props. Okay, so these are a few limitations which we have. Yeah, with this, I'm opening the forum for question and answers. Feel free to ask questions, or I mean, if you want to reach out asynchronously, you can reach out on the Twitter handle I provided, or you can provide comments in the React Magnet DI repo itself. The author, Alberto, is an awesome guy. I'm sure he will reply you in no time.
Hi Manaraj, we have one question in the chat.
Yeah. From the code perspective, how does the selective injection work in a tree of several lines of code? Thanks for asking, Rangaswamy. I'm really sorry that I didn't cover this up. I will quickly try to open the React Magnet AI, and if you see here, somewhere I saw the target.
Currently, we can see only your screen, your slide screen.
Thanks again for mentioning that. Now you can see, right?
Yes.
So I'm right now in the React Magnet AI repo. You can see here, I'll search for target. Yeah, you can mention which target, which hierarchy you have to use your injected component. You have this target instead of, while providing the use injected, and you can provide the target as well. So hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Manoj.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah, that's it from my end. Over to you, Kiran.
Yeah. Thanks, Manoj. So I think that's all the questions we have for now. So we came to the end of the meetup. Yeah, thanks for taking time for presenting. It's really nice talk.
Thanks for providing the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining the meetup. So next meetup we'll be probably having on October 31st. Uh, so see you all again then.
Sure. See you.
Yeah. Bye everyone.
Bye.